Proceeding into the year 2008, Universal Orlando Resort would again host the premier Halloween event, Halloween Horror Nights, for its 18th time. Coming off the Carnival of Carnage event, the team behind Halloween Horror Nights were ready to create another exciting yet terrifying event with all new haunted houses, scare zones, and entertainment, as this year's main aspects would tie into one central figure. I dare you to say her name one more time. This is the Reflections of Fear. This is SP History. In conceptualizing the 18th Halloween Horror Nights event, Universal would use what worked in the past to continue the success they've had for so many years before. These aspects would be having another icon to market the event, but also having a central storyline to play into the many aspects. This year's icon would play a very important role to every aspect, as their presence would be felt throughout. It would also be unique, as it would be based off an existing urban legend, as legends and tales would be the theme of this year's event. The infamous urban legend, Bloody Mary, would serve as the icon for 2008's Halloween Horror Nights event, but though she's an existing figure, Universal would elect to create an original, elaborate storyline for the character, as she would be integral to everything within the Halloween festivities. This version of Bloody Mary would be named Dr. Mary Agana, and her origins would begin before her birth, as she would be the granddaughter of Mary Worthington, which is the original name of Bloody Mary in traditional folklore, who was a school teacher in Cary, Ohio, an infamous Horror Nights location. Worthington would fall victim to a terrible Halloween plague in 1908, as a few students and a handyman at the school would cause the disappearance of the teacher, as her classroom was found covered in blood and shattered glass, as her body was never to be found. Mary Worthington would be survived by her daughter, Marie W. Agana, who would be the mother of Dr. Agana. Marie would later die in 1958, and with her death, Dr. Agana would receive valuable silver heirlooms from her mother, which originally were Worthington's. Mary Agana was a noted psychiatrist, and in that same year, she was trying to get her fear immersive therapy program funded by the National Association of Mental Health, as she was obsessed with phobias and wanted to understand how to cure fear. But due to the disturbing tactics Agana would take in this program, they would deny funding to her, and sent a letter to Agana stating they fear she would proceed with it anyways, and which she would. The doctor would open her facility called Living Fearlessly, specialized treatments for fear-based ailments, and Agana would see patients here to help cure their various fears and phobias. Dr. Agana would take advantage of this, as she and her assistants, who were ex-cons or mental patients, would torture patients to madness or death with their very own fears. With several patients beginning to disappear, a private investigator hired by one of the patients named Boris Schuster would become suspicious of Agana's clinic and begin an investigation into it, hoping to solve the disappearances of these individuals. Agana would start becoming increasingly paranoid, as she felt that she was being watched not only by Schuster, but by many malevolent spirits. But on August 27, 1958, Schuster would make an appointment with Agana to finally find out the truth. But on this night, Dr. Agana would be brutally murdered, thought by Schuster, but actually from one of her assistants after a confrontation. Though evidence of her murder, her body would not be found, just like her grandmother, and from there, some believed that her grandmother had been slowly possessing her since she had received the heirlooms by her mother, and in death, she became the new spirit of Bloody Mary. Later in the future in 2008, a paranormal investigation organization started by Boris Schuster named Legendary Truth, The Collective, would start an investigation into the disappearance of Agana's body, 50 years after her murder. Field operatives of Legendary Truth would visit the abandoned offices of Dr. Agana, in which was still in disarray since her death, and while inside the office, the operatives would run into the spirit of Bloody Mary, and be slaughtered by the horrifying figure as she broke out of the mirrors around. After this incident, Legendary Truth would not stop and continue their investigation into Bloody Mary and unveil the real horror that exists past the mirror world. With her backstory as the introduction to the event, Universal Studios Florida would be the entryway into Bloody Mary's mirror world, as guests would enter the mirror and encounter the many sinister realms that lied within. There would be 5 realms inside the mirror called fears, tales, urban legends, nightmares, and myths, each being equally unique and terrifying, as many horrific characters existed throughout. All the houses and scare zones would tie into Bloody Mary, as the houses would be linked to Agana's many patients who fell victim to her treatment, and many of the scare zones would be the manifestation of the 5 different realms. All that said, Halloween Horror Nights Reflections of Fear would run for another 23 nights from September to November, as it would include 8 haunted houses, 6 official scare zones, and 3 shows, as guests would enter the infamous mirror world and face the twisted, disturbing visions of Bloody Mary. Starting off with the houses of 2008's Halloween Horror Nights, there was 8 of them, and like mentioned, they tied into Dr. Mary Agana's patients, and some were inside the different realms of the mirror world. The first house would be placed inside Soundstage 22 and be an original concept, being inside the urban legends realm of the mirror world, being called Creatures. Within the house, guests enter a small town that has been rocked by a meteor, which would unleash an octopus-like alien upon the town, as guests look to escape its grasp. Originally, this house was going to be an IP house based off the 1981 horror film An American Werewolf in London, but was scrapped for unknown reasons, though this property would be revisited in the future. Creatures was tied into Jim Deedle, one of the many patients of Dr. Agana. Deedle was the son of one of the students who were responsible for her grandmother's death, and he was seeing Agana due to a fear of things resembling octopuses and monsters under the bed. Agana would attempt to cure his fear by placing him under hypnosis, as she put a sack over his head and tied ropes around his neck to make him believe he was caught by tentacles, while standing on a table. Agana told Deedle to end that fear, all he had to do was step off the table, but in doing so, Deedle got caught in the noose and strangled to death. Bloody Mary would also make a cameo inside the house, as she could be seen on a static television in the first room. The second house would be located in Soundstage 20 and be another original house as to transport guests into deep space, taking place inside the Nightmare Realm, being titled Interstellar Terror. Within, guests went on board the NSO Columbus 1492, as they are sent to investigate the spaceship which had been lost for many years before, as the crew had found a strange artifact while on their voyage. As guests explore the ship, they find out what caused the ship to disappear, as the artifact had the crew members go crazy and violent, as they look to take their pain out on the guests. The house was said to be loosely based off the film Event Horizon. Interstellar Terror's patient tie-in would be of Lieutenant Von Stiebler, as he was sent to see Dr. Agana, as he had a fear of strange alien symbols that he believed would cause the end of the world. To help cure his fear, Agana would strap Stiebler down in a chair and use eye clamps to force his eyes open, as he forced him to watch a slideshow of his last doctor's fishing trip, in which was the first time he saw the symbols. While watching, she gave the patient a pen to write things down on, but in such anguish of the images he was seeing, Stiebler began to carve the symbols into his flesh. Stiebler would be hospitalized after the visit, and Dr. Agana would keep the pen as a memento, as she was fascinated by his mere fear of images. The next house would also be placed inside Soundstage 20 and be a prequel to a popular Horror Nights property from the past, as it would be called Body Collectors Collections of the Past. Inside the myths realm of the mirror world, guests would enter Victorian London, as the collectors now roam the city looking to find their newest collections, as they use Jack the Ripper as a front for their disturbing business. The patient that tied into Body Collectors Collections of the Past would go by the name of Dr. Christian Kubush. Kubush was actually one of the students complicit in the disappearance of Agana's grandmother, but also one of the board members who denied funding for her fear therapy program. So out of spite and revenge, Dr. Agana would kidnap Kubush and trap him in a room full of mirrors and dead bodies, as he had a fear of the latter and surgery. With Kubish frantic and screaming Agana's safety word, she proceeds to drill a hole in his back, killing him and extracting her revenge. The fourth house to be featured would be located inside the now Disaster Queue, and not only be inside the Nightmares realm, but also an IP house based off the 2008 Universal sci-fi action film Doomsday, with the house sharing the same name. In it, guests would be taken into the popular scenes from the film as they enter a ruthless post-apocalyptic world full of maniacs, ready to kill. The patient related to this house would be Thornton Kesterson, who was the son of the handyman who helped kill Worthington, and he had a fear of disease and fire. He went to Dr. Organa to treat his fear, and in helping, she numbed him with anesthesia, tied him to a chair, and surrounded him with crematorial jets and mirrors. She said to him that this would help him experience his fear but feel nothing. With his fear intensifying, he said the safety word, and Organa would turn on the jets, causing the mirrors to shatter and impale his body, soon after incinerating him. The following house was placed inside the Jaws queue and be the icon house for Bloody Mary, as it would be officially called Reflections of Fear. Inside the house, guests would enter the notorious office of Dr. Mary Organa, as she committed many murders inside to help cure her own fear, death. Interestingly, while inside, you enter two versions of the office, as one would be the abandoned decrepit 2008 version where Bloody Mary haunts guests, but the other would be the 1958 version where Dr. Organa and her many assistants look to torture guests to end their fears. The last room of the house had guests walking through the office with both versions on either side, with Dr. Organa and Bloody Mary standing on their respective sides, scaring guests. This house is also interesting, as it is the only house to ever share the same name with the event's main title. The patient to correlate with this house was actually Boris Schuster, the investigator who was looking into Dr. Organa's practice as he tried to uncover the mystery behind Bloody Mary. The sixth house of the event will be located inside Sprungtet 2 and be a significant highlight of this year's event, as it was touted as one of the best houses ever, as it was called Dead Exposure. Taking place inside the Nightmare realm, the story behind the house is that guests are following a photographer named Charlie McPherson, as he is trapped inside a zombie-filled city, and you recall his experience through his very own terrifying pictures. What made this house unique and one of the best is that it was very dark inside, and the only source of light was a flickering strobe that would illuminate the haunting images of the zombies that filled his city and looked to feast on the guests. Dead Exposure won House of the Year for 2008. The patient related to this house was a parallel version of Charlie McPherson. McPherson in Dr. Organa's reality was seeing ghoulish images every time a flash came from his camera, and he went to see her to help end this, and in doing so, Organa would place McPherson inside a glass box with flashing bulbs, causing him to see the scary images. Organa told him for it to end, he just had to open the lid to the glass box, but he didn't, in which he would slowly suffocate to death. Notably, this patient was the one who got Boris Schuster involved with Dr. Organa, as he once worked with him as a freelancer. The next house would be placed in Sprungtet 1 and take place in the myth realm of the Mirror World, as it would be titled The Hollow. In here, the Lord of the Underworld, Saman, summons all the deadly souls of Halloween as they haunt guests in a wicked forest. The patient involved with the Hollow was named Eileen Harrell. Her fear was of myths and legends, particularly the Headless Horseman who makes an appearance inside the house. Going to Dr. Organa to seek help, Organa would place her in a locked room with mirrors surrounding her, as a table sat in the middle of it with a covered object on it. Dr. Organa told Harold to uncover the object, and as she did, it revealed a severed head, which sent the patient into hysterics, causing her to be sent to a mental asylum after the incident. The final house to be at the event will be located inside a brand new location, the Parade Warehouse, where they store various parade floats inside, and be the third version of the famous Horror Nights original concept, Scary Tales, as this one would be called Scary Tales Once Upon a Nightmare. Being within the Tales realm, this version of the house had more story involved, as the evil queen is in charge of the land and uses her minions called the Scribes to rewrite all the fairy tales in her favor, causing all these beloved characters to become crazed, terrifying killers. The house consisted of many returning evil versions of Snow White and Alice in Wonderland, but also included more new characters like Cinderella and Rapunzel. The final patient to relate to Scary Tales Once Upon a Nightmare was a woman named Diane Bennett. She had a fear of fairy tales, and in trying to cure her fear, Dr. Organa had Bennett sit in a circle surrounded by mental asylum patients as they recited fairy tales to her. Diane became hysterical and started to shout the safety word, which would trigger the patients to attack her and ultimately kill her. That completes the lineup of houses for the 2008 Halloween Horror Nights event, each being unique and terrifying in their own right, and being the ultimate test of fear administered by Bloody Mary herself. Moving into the scare zones of this year's event, Day 2 correlated with Bloody Mary's Mirror World and had many urban legends and creatures lurking around the streets. The first scare zone would be placed in the Plaza of the Stars in Production Central and be called the Path of the Wicked. The zone would be a disturbing version of the Wizard of Oz, as the Wicked Witch of the West has won and rules over the land of Oz, causing total mayhem. Characters like Tin Man and Cowardly Lion roamed here as terrifying versions of themselves, scaring guests all about, as flying monkeys jumped on top of the sound stages. The next zone would also be in Production Central, now in Shrek Alley, and be called American Gothic. Here, being a part of the urban legends realm, many American legends and serial killers like the Headless Horseman and Lizzie Borden roam the streets, looking to inflict pain on anyone who passes. The third scare zone would be held in the New York area and be directly related to the house Body Collectors Collections of the Past, as the zone was titled Streets of Blood. Within this zone, the collectors and their assistants roamed the streets of Victorian London as they looked to bring guests back to their facility to make them a fine piece of their collection. The famous Rat Lady made an appearance inside this scare zone. The fourth zone featured would be placed in Woody Woodpecker's Kids Zone, a first-time location, and being unofficially linked to both houses' Scary Tales Once Upon a Nightmare and The Hollow, as it was called Fractured Tales. In the zone, many fairy tale and Halloween characters roam around as they lead you into the respective entrances of the two houses. The next zone would be held near Mel's Drive-In and be a part of the urban legends realm, being titled The Schoolhouse. Here, guests entered the very schoolhouse that Mary Worthington, Dr. Organa's grandmother, disappeared in, and over time, Bloody Mary has been influencing the kids at the school to go on murder sprees. They now roam around looking to make guests their next victims. This scare zone was unique as Universal constructed an actual schoolhouse for the zone, in which the guests would walk through in, where most of the school children would be inside, lurking around for their next kill. The last scare zone would be placed in the Hollywood area and be the expanded twisted version of Alice in Wonderland, being officially called Asylum in Wonderland. Taking place in the Fear realm, guests entered the Mad version of Wonderland, as evil versions of the Mad Hatter and Queen of Hearts walk around to create the ultimate nightmare. Though there being 6 official scare zones, there were some unofficial zones not listed that added to the atmosphere of the event. For instance, one would be located in the front lot of the park and be labeled as Dark Reflections. The zone consisted of Bloody Mary's mirror minions roaming around as they guide guests into the mirror world. Another unofficial zone would be located in the San Francisco area and be labeled as Doomsday the Infected. Related to the film and house nearby, the Chainsaw Drill team owned the streets, as they are part of the maniacs who infest the world from the film. A third unofficial zone was set in the World Expo area and be simply labeled Zombies. Here, hordes of flesh-eating zombies walked about, looking to feast on anyone who dares stand. It could be assumed it was meant to correlate with the nearby house, Dead Exposure. Lastly, another zone that labeled was placed in Central Park and be called the Harvest. Here, over 500 jack-o'-lanterns were laid into the trees above, lighting up the dark sky while the kids from the schoolhouse zone linger about to trick or treat. The jack-o'-lanterns in this area would become a tradition for many events in the future. But like every other Halloween Horror Nights event, it would have its fair share of entertainment to provide great energy aside the houses and zones. Though not being related to the theme of Bloody Mary, the 3 shows that occurred this year would be the return of fan favorites from the previous 2007 event. The first show would be located inside the Beetlejuice Graveyard Review stage and be the return of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, a tribute. The show would maintain the same elements as last year's show, as it would be the stage rendition of this 1975 classic cult film. The next show will be held inside the Fear Factor live stage and be the acclaimed comedy parody show Bill and Ted's Excellent Halloween Adventure. This year's show once again involves the Wild Stallions as they team up with Hellboy as they try to protect the crown that controls the Golden Army from evil villains, as a cast of characters and celebrities of 2008 invade their quests with laughs and hysterics. Characters to be involved with the show were Indiana Jones, Barack Obama, and the Joker. The last show would be placed inside the Animal Actor stage and be the returning act of a renowned magician, as the show was simply titled Brian Brushwood. The show consisted of Brushwood's many death-defying feats and mind tricks, as he astonishes guests at this year's event. That concludes the entire 18th Halloween Horror Nights event, providing great street atmosphere and excellent entertainment offerings, topping off another successful year. Halloween Horror Nights Reflections of Fear will go down as one of the most elaborate and terrifying years up to date, as it provided so many new scares and themes to the overall lore. Bloody Mary proved to be a worthy icon as she inflicted fear throughout the duration of the event. But as Bloody Mary's disturbing world fades back into the haunting mirror, Halloween Horror Nights would again return with more haunts the following year, as more horror would be ushered in to Universal Studios Florida.